you, Veronica. Let me just take care of the screen here for a minute. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me and see the screen just fine here. This is, starting out with the data dive. We'll move here and give you an overview. So this is going to be the first of, we'll call it a 3-part series. This one we're calling data dive. More on that in a minute. We'll be doing 2 other workshops on May 18th and May 25th. May 18th, we'll talk about barriers and equity. We'll talk about some new features where you can run reports by barrier and lots of other ways. We'll also talk about those I3 reports a little bit. That is, we'll focus on being able to do reporting that focuses on, priority populations. And then May 25th, we'll do one, we'll call it CAPE performance goals. It'll be similar to some of those NRS performance goal sessions. I know a lot of you have probably attended, but it will be applied to CAPE reporting using the CAPE summary and CAPE reports as kind of the anchor for a lot of the goal setting rather than the NRS reports. And it will also kind of cover a lot of things that will be in NOVA. You've probably heard people like Neil mention that when you do the new 3-year planning in NOVA, it won't be that reporter narrative you've been doing in the past. It will be a goal setting activity where you use your data. Some of that will definitely involve barriers. Some of that will definitely involve looking at the CAPE summary and so on. So we'll start looking at some ideas and different ways to meet those requirements in the training on May 25th. So back to today, this is a little bit of an obnoxious Pete and repeat for some people. Some have seen these graphics, but I've got to say I got surprised by our little co-host group. Very counter to the way it's been at any meeting, but just to warm it up, everybody's chatting. What's everybody's stance on alphabet soup? Are you pro alphabet soup, anti-alphabet soup? What does everybody think about alphabet soup? I thought I had preconceived notions on the way everybody was, but I gotta say, some people kind of surprised me here. So what do you think about alphabet soup? Do you love it or not really? So you tired of it? Okay, only one answer. I guess, love it. Okay, there we go. Somebody loves it. So any other opinions? Nobody really feels like weighing in on alphabet soup. It seems like a real easy question that people would throw in. Okay, so now the results are coming in. I gotta say it's a good mixed group though. Other time it drives you crazy. Okay, well anyway, okay, all kinds of answers. All right, well I gotta say the other times I brought it up, everybody seems super duper enthusiastic about it. This is a decidedly more mixed bunch. I even see a no out there. So hey, yeah, there are no alternatives. So you can see there's an alphabet soup graphic in the upper left. I'm just asking it because usually it's an easy rally cry because everybody loves it, but boy, was I wrong here. But I like to bring it up. It's my data now. Well, just to finish the story, sorry to the co-host, I just said this 5 minutes ago, but I used to love alphabet soup as a kid. The only problem with it, of course, is there were never enough alphabets in the soup, right? You wanted to spell words, but there were never enough alphabets in the soup to spell it out there, right? There were always some alphabets missing. So for what it's worth, my mom used to always tell me, they had to put it in alphabet cereal. That's why there's never enough alphabets in your alphabet soup. So it's kind of a goofy data analogy in that, your data is always going to be a little bit like alphabet soup, right? First off, it's 125% wonderful, just like alphabet soup, but it's also always going to be a little incomplete. There's always going to be that extra word that you want to be able to spell that you're just not going to spell. And no matter what you do, there's a 125% chance that's going to happen to you. My other goofy analogy, that's another one some of you have heard before, is that House of Mirrors analogy. That is, whenever I'm in a house. How many of you have been in a house of mirrors? By the way, that's another good survey question that's easy for people to answer. Anybody been in a house of mirrors like this crazy cat in the picture? Most have. But if I'm in a house of mirrors, I'm just like this crazy cat in the picture. where I'm kind of looking over my shoulder because I want to be able to see the back of my head hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of times. That always kind of freaks me out that I can see the back of my head that many times. But that's also kind of how the data is that you're, kind of dissecting it one way, you're going forth and conquering, and then you're needing to dissect it the other way, and you're going forth and conquering, and they'll tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on. That is, you keep hair splitting, and there's literally no end to the hair splitting. It's just like this House of Mirrors guy where you can never really stop splitting it. It just gets split into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So, a lot of times we can't help that, but sometimes knowing that that's a painful truth is just good to keep in mind. And that brings us to the goofy little gendarme here, to represent the data police is using the concept of alphabet soup, using the concept of the House of Mirrors. We're also mindful that, we're probably not going to really be that worried about the data police. You've heard that one a lot. So I bring this up to say there's going to be a lot of hair splitting in this session. It's not going to be presented as, hey, if you don't have it down to this level of scientific detail, the Kate police are going to get you. It's rather that everybody asks for that level of gory detail. So this is actually the session where we're trying to provide that, that is answering questions. And on that note, these are the two newbies. Nobody's seen these goofy graphics before, but I'm calling this the cocktail napkin session here, that literally these are kind of issues that have been malingering for probably a year and a half, 2 years or more. That is, regional meetings, data regional trainings, whatever, where, hey, what's the, difference between workforce prep milestone and occupational skills gain? If you're applying it to CTE, how is that different than applying it to workforce prep? Blah, 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 blah. So all of those cocktail napkin notes that have been accruing over the last 2 or 3 years, I don't know if it'll work or not, but this is actually the session where we went ahead and dug out the old matchbooks, dug out the old cocktail napkins, and tried to decipher these crazy notes on the back of matchbooks and cocktail napkins, and tried to put it together in a presentation. That is all these goofy little, who's on first issues. If this is on first and I don't know who's on third, what do we ultimately need to bubble on the bubble boy? That's basically what this is going to try to do. Hopefully these graphics gave you some idea. If not, I'll just say sorry for the 5 minutes of self-indulgence with the graphics, and I will move on to the agenda. So we'll do a quick review to start. We'll just review the program structure and Kate that we talked about in our accountability at the start of the year. So if you were in the trainings we did, probably August, September, we got into that a little bit. AB 104 obviously goes way farther than that. I'm not sure I've ever done a training for CAPE or for AP or for ABG or for AB 86 where I didn't spend at least a little time talking about AB 104 outcomes. This one will be no exception. And then these second two bullets are kind of what I'm talking about with the matchbooks and cocktail napkins. That is distinguishing, not really identifying, but distinguishing key outcomes. That's been the rub for everybody. And so the idea will be looking at some troubleshooting examples at the student level. We'll kind of presume in this session that everybody's had enough bubble boy and retrofitting diagrams and all that already. You kind of know how to mark it in TE. You kind of know what to mark on the form and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is more you're looking to figure out what student-driven scenarios actually occur that drives you to actually do said bubbling or said clicking or said importing or whatever the case may be. So these are the 4 areas in no particular order of importance, but just areas where it comes up. We'll look at the quote unquote academic programs and look at some specific issues with literacy gains. Then we'll get into some issues with workforce prep and CTE. We'll look at some transitions. Those crazy diagrams I know drive a lot of people nuts. And then we'll also try to give a couple examples related to recording services. So that will be the bulk of it here. Not sure that's exactly what people were expecting. You know, I've got to say, this is one of those workshops that took a mind of its own. If you told me a week ago what this workshop is going to be about, I'll be honest, I would have given you a completely different answer than what I'm explaining to you right now. This is definitely one of those funny things happened on the way to the forum type presentations. Hopefully that doesn't cause everybody to run for the exits right now. But getting back to maybe regularly scheduled programming at the end, we will talk about CAPE reports and TE, you know, just because if I don't, everybody will be scratching their heads. But it will be very important because the second two sessions I mentioned earlier will be a lot more TE oriented. But I really think this is the one that people have been asking for 2 years or longer. I don't know if that's everybody here, because probably everybody that asked for it may not be here anymore. I'm not sure, but it is definitely one that people have been asking about for a while. That I really do think. Okay, so starting in review, here's a slide that, you know, probably some of you have seen our CAPE program structure. You know, we have 7 programs officially, but the way it all rolls up is really into 5 programs. We have 3 primary programs, that is ABE, ESL, and CTE. And then we also have adults with disabilities and parents supporting K-12 success. You know, we now have it rolled up this way. This was a statewide change at the start of the 2019-20 year. So we talked about it a little bit in review at the start of this year, because obviously a lot of that stuff got forgotten. You know, you've heard 7 programs. I'll just say it's rolled up on the ABE side for CAPE reporting purposes. ABE and ASE are one program. Pretty much in the rest of the world, of course, ABE and ASE are 2 separate programs, or usually they're 3 separate programs, ABE, HSE, and HS Diploma. But in CAPE land, it's all rolled up into one program. The other little okay, sorry, I had a little intermediate slide, so that explains out a little bit what I mean by ABE. And then in CTE, we have 4 sort of subsets of CTE all rolled into one. Obviously, it includes CTE, which is just the what we normally think of. We've got long-term and short-term CTE, and then we have our pre-apprenticeship and our workforce prep programs. In the previous structure, those were standalone individual CAPE programs. The last couple of years now, they get rolled into CTE. You can still record, you know, NTE or on your enrollment form or whatever, CTE, workforce prep, and pre-apprenticeship separately, but we do, you know, roll it up all into one when we report to the state. Here's a little bit of guidance, you know, CTE, usually long-term occupation specific. Short-term is also occupation specific, but short-term, not long-term. Pre-apprenticeship is a lot like CTE. It focuses on an occupation and goes for a while, but it's just a different model. Workforce prep is the opposite. It's usually something really short-term and more generic workforce, not focusing on one particular occupation. Okay, another in review area is the issue of adults served. I'm getting a little bit non sequitur here. I'm just looking for things to review from, you know, basic CAPE accountability that I do think will be relevant for this and the next couple sections. So another review issue is adults served. I'll kind of knock on this one because I kind of see this one as getting bigger here when you look at NOVA, and this will start to become a bigger issue, I think, as we move forward into 21, 22. Coming pretty soon. I don't want to give a date because it's sure to be wrong, but coming sort of soon in TE, there'll be an update to the CAPE summary that breaks out, you know, your enrollment numbers, you know, that is adults served into these 3 categories. So we're saying all the people that show up are considered adult served. You've probably heard Neil mention that term before, and we'll be breaking them into 3 categories. That is the service-only students, that is those with 0 hours, versus those that have 1 to 11 hours, versus, of course, the participants with 12 or more hours that qualify for outcomes and qualify for those pre-post literacy gains. We'll start breaking that down more. And in particular, there's an increased need to distinguish those with 0 hours versus those with 1 to 11 hours. So when you look at that services section, you'll get a handy reference that will break that down for you. You know, the other quote, hint, 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 we'll be talking about this more over the next few months, is that that's one of the official goals you'll be looking at. For those of you that have been at this a while and did those CAPE in-person data dives from 2 or 3 years ago, you might remember that kick the tires persistence metric we talked about. Sorry, for vanity purposes only, does anybody remember that maybe circa 2018-19 when we talked about kicking the tires, and we had you know, we would basically look at that persistence metric where we'd look at the services students and say, of all the service only students, how many of them enrolled in a program? Of those that enrolled in a program, how many at least got 12 hours? We brought I used to call it the kick the tires. That is, they come in to kick the tires. We want them to stick around, not disappear. So it was just a simple way to measure kind of preliminary persistence, you might say. So that will be a more forced family fun metric. When you get into NOVA this summer, there'll be a goal that everybody will have to do that uses this sort of information. Right, so services only would be 0 hours of instruction. Potentially, it could be a student that enrolled in one of those CAPE programs and just never received any attendance hours. You know, usually that would be just somebody that you forgot to mark attendance for, I suppose. But the official terminology to just assume everybody's making on purposes and never making accidents would be to say, yeah, the 0 hours would be the quote unquote service only students. Okay, good question. And thanks for humoring me by remembering. I'll just say, any other questions to shake out right now? Okay. All right. And then this is another graphic I'm sure you've seen many, 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 many times. This is just proof in the pudding that what we do for CAPE is 100% aligned to federal reporting. We've talked a lot over the years about in federal reporting, they have what are called performance indicators and what are called measurable skill gains. Employment and wages are 2 of what the feds call performance indicators. That is, you know, just results that are, yippee, I got a job, yippee, you know, I got a wage increase, you know, measuring it based on, you know, that way. Measurable skill gains are more for measuring progress. Those are the 5 federal measurable skill gains: literacy, secondary, post-secondary, and then training milestones, skills progression, more on that later. But you can see if you combine measurable skill gains and performance indicators, not so coincidentally, that represents, you know, very close to those 6 areas of AB 104 that represent those areas that were required to report in outcomes for CAPE. Okay, and here's another slide you've seen even more. I'm not gonna get into this too much now, but these are the 6 areas in which we're required to report. It's specifically stipulated by the state legislature, and this is just the master chart that shows all the different possible outcomes that fit into these 6 categories stipulated by AB 104. Okay, so I'll just say, probably should have had a little bit of a segue. This is still in the area of review, but now I'm digging into a couple of specific examples. I think now, before I just turn on a dime here, let's sanity check here. Everybody hear me? Everybody hanging in there? How is everybody doing? Let me just stop for a minute. Let everybody tie their shoes, whatever. Okay, great. Doing great. Okay, good. All right, so we'll move right along here. And again, I'm not going to go over all these outcomes. That's a couple hours we don't have. But there are always some that seem to be that seem to always generate questions every training. So one of them is high school credits. I will say probably on both sides, but I'll just say probably more on the we owe it to side. There has been state level discussion on, maybe new and improved ways on doing this, different opinions on whether there are any new and improved ways or not. But anyway, for CAPE and for California, we owe it to. High school credits is an official outcome. It's been part of federal reporting now for 5 years. But what it says, if a student progresses through high school credits to advance from ASE low to ASE high in a year, that's a measurable skill gain. That counts on NRS Table 4, meaning it also counts as a California payment point, meaning it also counts as an official CAPE outcome. Bottom line is we have this in TE. We do acknowledge it in both payment points and CAPE, but we have a workaround to record this. All districts deal with credits a little bit differently. So we use the self-reported level field in TE. Here's the menu destination of where to find this record. Go to record student records. You'd select ASE low upon enrollment and then select ASE high sometime later in the year to show that student progressed. Real quick example, we kind of need to move fast, but my example to keep it simple, let's say your district required 200 credits for high school graduation. That's not everybody, but that's a pretty common number. No, it's for high school diploma, not high school equivalency. Good question. So let's say you require 200 credits to earn your HS diploma. So then, in my opinion, the magic number is 100 because that's the halfway point. If they're below 100, that would be ASE low. That is below 100 suggests that student is at either the 9th or 10th grade level. Above 100 suggests the student's at either the 11th or 12th grade level. So if the student starts the year below 100 and finishes the year above 100, in my example, that would suggest that they made gains through high school credits. Not necessarily for this. You do need to select ASE low in one sitting and then select ASE high in another sitting. And you need to show it in this way. You do need the usual suspects like gender, date of birth, 12 or more hours and all that. But this side doesn't necessarily, this side doesn't necessarily look for the pretest. Then that means, they're not going to get this outcome. They're going to get the high school diploma outcome, but it would be the same thing as if you had an ASE student that pretested 255 on their CASAS reading goals. Hey, they've just got too high of a pretest score to make a gain. Great that they pretested and great that they did well, but they're scoring too high to make a measurable skill gain. If they only need 5 credits, it's kind of the same thing. They're too advanced. So yeah, they can get their high school diploma, but there really isn't enough room for growth that they're going to get a high school credits outcome. Okay, good question. I guess your questions will make me feel good about the fact that I added this slide in. That's what I wasn't sure about. I don't see any other questions. These are all good ones, but that's one area that's a frequent flyer miler question generator. These are 2 more. We've got the 2 CTE related literacy gains outcomes. One is called occupational skills gain. The other is called workforce prep milestone. Back to the CAPE data police, there's nobody that's going to really get you in trouble if you get these confused or have a different way of doing it. But if you do it the right way, this is the way I would say. You would mark occupational skills gain when the student achieves partial accomplishment of a longer term program. Mark workforce prep outcome for full completion of a shorter term program. On the occupational skills gain side, again, partial accomplishment of something longer term. So here's an example. A lot of you, yes, it could be. More on your point, verb later. There's other ways now you can have that recorded, but hold that thought. It's a good one. Anyway, occupational skills gain. This is an old, tired, but still, I think, solid example. If you've got a CTE student enrolled in welding, we're just making it up. We'll say it's 5 semesters or 5 modules long. The student finishes module 1. They pass a skills check or some kind of written test to show, great, they're ready to move out of module 1 and enroll into module 2. That would be an example where you would mark occupational skills gain. Workforce prep outcome, on the other hand, is full completion of something shorter term. So in this example, they enroll and complete a 15-hour workforce prep class on job search strategies. They get something informal, for this, it can, hey, the secretary prints a certificate from her computer, something like that, but just something to kind of show that they did something instead of nothing. And that basically would be a time for workforce prep milestone or workforce prep outcome. That is, they completed something shorter term, standalone, etc. Okay, and then this is another one we talked about in the past. So one question is, when you're looking at those literacy gains, what the heck is the difference between workforce prep milestone and occupational skills gain? Once you reconcile the 2 literacy gains, when do those kind of workforce outcomes rise up to the level of post-secondary? So to the left, you can see we've got the quote unquote higher level post-secondary outcomes like occupational licensure or occupational certificate. We've got the literacy gains or measurable skill gains, down below. So what we would say is mark one of the literacy gains for partial completion of something longer term or full completion of something shorter term. That rises to the level of post-secondary when the student completes that longer term program. So in my example, they get an occupational skills gain when they move from module 1 to module 2, or from module 2 to module 3, and so on. They would get the occupational licensure certificate or the post-secondary outcome once they completed, module 5 of 5 and completed that full welding program. So that's the example to full fruition. Hopefully there's some help there somewhere. I'll just pause here. Any questions about those 2 literacy gains or how those 2 literacy gains outcomes compare to post-secondary? I'll pause here. Okay, I don't see anything, so I'll move on. This is one from way back. I haven't included this probably in a few years here, but when we started talking about post-secondary outcomes for Kate, this is the list we would use. You might have seen this in some of the Civics / IELCE slides. Sometimes we use this as a good rule of thumb measurement for what includes a credentialed program. So when we talk, I'll back up a step and say, when we rise to the level of post-secondary, when we say they got their credential, licensure, or certificate, we're basically saying they achieved a post-secondary outcome. If we're saying they achieved a post-secondary outcome, we're usually saying they achieved something that rises to this level. That is, it's something comprising a legitimate career pathway. There's nothing in the books that says exactly what that is. If it's this way, there's 100% chance it is. If it ain't, there's 100% chance it ain't. There's nothing like that in any way, shape, or form, but it does at least give you clues. If it's on the employment or eligible training provider list, that is. If it's something on the Title I approved list, by definition, it counts as a credentialed program. The college side uses hours. I don't know of anybody else that does, but if you're looking for some round number, related to hours. You know, the colleges use 48. So they're saying, yeah, if it's 48 hours or more, then that's long enough to constitute a quote unquote credentialed program. Those of you that do Perkins is stricter than WIOA or CAPE. So if it's good enough for Perkins, we're saying, yeah, if it's good enough for Perkins, that means it's good enough for CAPE, good enough for WIOA too. And if it meets that threshold for Title IV student aid, some of you that are doing COE auditing or whatever, that's a much higher bar yet. So if you're able to qualify for that, you're definitely good to go for this purpose. But these are just the rules of thumb we've talked about. So again, if you're trying to determine whether you should mark a post-secondary outcome, these are good rules of thumb to use to say, yeah, this is a post-secondary outcome versus maybe not. And then this is one that we've talked about on the WIOA 2 EL Civics side for IET. We've talked about that issue related to career pathways. In general, for it to be a career pathway, it should meet one of these rules of thumb. That is, it's on somebody's eligible list. There's some governing body that says, yes, this is a program that results in an approved credential. Generally, that's what you're saying with the career pathway. As we've talked about things like EL co-enrollment and integrated education and training, I know that's easier said than done. So we've also talked about sometimes if you piece it together just the right way, it can comprise a career pathway. You know, generally speaking, you can check with your CDE consultant and see how it goes. Check in with your representatives at the CAPE office or chancellor's office. You know, mostly this has been a big issue for those of you who do IET, ILCE. You know, you've worked on it, with lots of folks, to show that, yes, you're piecing things together in a deliberate manner and, had it as a pathway. I don't think I got this level of detail here, but the other thing I'll bring up unsolicited while I'm here is another thing you could do is go to your local workforce board, work with your Title I partner, get on their list. I know some of you have done that. I've had some participate in these trainings and kind of speak to it. But one good thing to do for your program, if you're not sure if you've got it credentialed or not, is present it to your local Title I workforce board, show what it is you're working on in your own career tech ed or other programs at your college or adult school, and get it on your local approved list. If it's on the local list for your local workforce board, by definition, then it's a credentialed program. By definition, you don't need to worry about what the CAPE office says, what the CDE person says, what the CASAS person says, whatever. I'll just say that's the best way to make sure that it's a post-secondary outcome. Okay, that might be 5 minutes you never get back, but I kind of got on the soliloquy and didn't reel myself in, I guess. So I will do so now. But these are some other ways, kind of infinite ways of trying to measure this. Again, back to the House of Mirrors alphabet soup. You could go on ad nauseum, local WDB list. Well, so what do you, you mean the list that not a WDB list, but you mean the list that the WDB disseminates is what you mean by that, right, Usha? You're not talking about a list of the boards, but a list the board made. Yes, the ETPL is a list made by your local workforce board. That is in any local region. I think we've got maybe 50 regions in the state. So each region has a board, and in your local region, they're responsible for, determining who the certified programs are for each occupation. So yeah, that's who presents it, yes. Okay, sorry, I digress. So anyway, I don't think there's any cost to it. That would be a question. Have any of you done it? I don't think there's a cost, but I gotta say I'm way less than 100% sure. If somebody told me that's a local district issue and in some regions it does, and in some regions it doesn't. It wouldn't surprise me. Okay, thank you, Diana. Thank you, Connie. Okay, no, everybody's saying no. Okay, thank you. All right, great. Thank you for all that. All right, these are great questions, very reassuring questions, I'll add. Eligible training provider list. Long story short is on the WIOA Title I side, that is on the workforce provider side, rather than the adult ed literacy side like we do in Title II. On the workforce board side, one of their responsibilities is maintaining the eligible trainer provider list, which is just a list of programs in your region that they've certified to be, authorized, credentialed programs, authorized career pathways, etc. Okay, so back to it's really hard to make concrete determinations sometimes. It's really hard to get out of the judgment part of this. So if you're looking for clues to make better judgments, a qualified post-secondary credentialed program would be associate's degree, bachelor's degree, obviously. If it's occupational licensure such as CNA or occupational certification such as ASC, those are obviously real good examples. Registered apprenticeship programs, if it's a CTE program that makes one of those CTE certificates. And then the other recognized certificates are kind of what we're talking about in every region. They have this, I think I saw Pat Pizzanos on here. Sorry, for whatever reason, I always like to pick on Moreno Valley here just because I know it. So if you're there, Moreno Valley, sorry in advance. Oh, there you go. All right, she's here. Yep. Is just because I've driven east on the 60, so I know the Skechers warehouse and that massive amount of warehouses you have in Moreno Valley. Warehouse work doesn't really have like a national or state authorizing body like automotive does or nursing does or whatever. There's nothing like that. But hey, if you're in Moreno Valley and you've got like 100 warehouses in a 10-mile radius of you, obviously you want to have a program for warehouse work. It's the obvious place that you're going to look to place a lot of your students. So they've put together a little program that includes stuff like forklift operator and things like that. Now they've whittled down. So they've informed me that it's not as good an example as it used to be, but I'll still use it because I like it. And it illustrates the point that there's no governing body for that. There's no place to hang your hat, but it's clearly something that in that region, it's a regional priority. It's clearly something that they're using as certification that results in students in that region getting employed. So that's an example of one that you might recognize locally that may not necessarily be one that carries over to all the different boards. So I'll just stop and give this a mercy killing. Thank you for interjecting with the questions, and thanks, Pat. But this will be my time to say sanity check. Everybody hanging in there, or is everybody flying the coop here slowly but surely? Okay, thanks for still alive. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then here's the ones that do not. So of course, in true blue fashion, we usually spend roughly 25 to 50 more times harping on the don'ts than the do's. Human nature there. You can't include OSHA. You can't include Microsoft Office. You can't include CPR. You can't include, hand washing. These are ones that you've heard a lot of us talk about a lot. Again, if you've got one of these that you're piecing together, and you've got the 15 or 20 different puzzle pieces comprising a whole, you might want to include some of these pieces to comprise a component of that overall whole, but these don't comprise post-secondary credentials standalone. They might be a missing link, but they're not going to be in and of itself a post-secondary outcome. Okay, and then if you're really wanting to dig in the weeds, and I know some of you have, hey, some of us love the House of Mirrors. If so, you've done some of that, back of the head observing or whatever. Here's attributes of a quality credentialed program. It's accessible, that is, it's affordable, it's available, easy to get to, and so on. If students are aware that it exists, they're aware of how to get there, what they need to do. Right. So you're right, Yuleen. I think for your question, Yuleen, my answer is going to be stay tuned. We've got more to come with specific examples, just like you're listing. So don't touch that dial because it's coming up here very shortly. So a good credentialed program is going to be accessible. It's going to be transparent. If there are costs, the student are aware of each and every one of them and are aware ahead of time. If there's prerequisites, certain skills they need to have or certain courses they need to do in advance, it's very clear that that needs to be done, very clear what skills and knowledge are needed, very clear what they're going to get out of it at the end, et cetera, et cetera. It's stackable. That's that puzzle pieces analogy again, where you need to be able to show that you've deliberately pieced it together to show that it comprises a career pathway. Easier said than done. It's admittedly a little bit judgmental, but you want to be able to show that it results, in an outcome, and that you've been thoughtful and deliberate in the way you've stacked it together. It should be portable, meaning it's transferable. What you do, what you do in Moreno Valley for warehouse work is not going to use the exact same language as what they might do in Fresno for their warehouse program, but it should at least be portable in the sense that the sort of things you're requiring in Moreno Valley for that kind of work sure looks a heck of a lot what they're requiring in Fresno. So if somebody leaves Moreno Valley and ends up at Fresno, you could, make those skills portable and show that there's a similar program 200 or 300 miles away that compares favorably and results in the same outcome for the student. It's meaningful, obviously results in job wage increases and so on, and links to a specific job or educational pathway. And again, we talked about how the main way you're going to be doing that, it relates to some sort of educational pathway. Okay, so another example, you've seen these. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That you're dangling, you're putting me in danger with that one. Those are way too many bad, inappropriate examples there, so I better avoid that one. Anyway, transition. Everybody's seen this slide many, many times. We've got a transition to CTE, transition to college, transition to CTE. We'll actually start over. Either one of them has the same starting point. It's either K-12 adult ed or it's non-credit community college. If they transfer to K-12 adult ed CTE or community college CTE, that's considered transition to CTE. If they are at either one of those starting points and end up in for-credit community college, that would be a transition to college. Examples on this one, yep, it's etched in your brain. Anyway, if it's for-credit college, it's a transition. More on this later. Another, hey, don't touch that dial. But there's a few examples distinguishing, how this happens between non-credit community college versus how it happens on the for-credit side. Okay, so here we're just breaking it down. If you didn't get it the first time with the full graphic, here's half the graphic showing how it looks for CTE. And here's the other half of the graphic, how it looks for college. Okay, and here's the bubble boy slide. Hey, we can't get a Kate presentation in without at least showing the bubble boy slide. So there it is. The other non-joking reason is that we're going to be talking about these outcomes incessantly. Obviously, we have already, but I'm not wanting to spend time referring to, okay, which bubble do you bubble for occupation? Oh, yeah, it's acquired workforce skills and, skills. I don't want to refer to this. Just know that it's there. Look it up. Match your bubble boy. Match your bubbles to the appropriate bubble boy, and you'll figure out what to mark in TE And again, if you don't like the Bubble Boy slide and you like this one better, here's more of a directly how to market in TE slide. So this is just so we don't have to go there anymore on all that. Okay, so now we're going to get to the examples here. Here's where we're finally able to, stop saying don't touch that dial anymore, because we're finally here at the feature presentation. So again, we're going to do some examples for, again, the quote unquote academic programs, ABE, ASC, and ESL, and then kind of get more in the career occupational programs, talk a little bit more about CTE and workforce prep, and then we'll get more specifically into some transitions examples. So starting with the quote unquote academic side, we'll look at high school credits. We'll look at distance learning. We'll look at EL Civics and COAPs, and we'll look at IET. High school credits doesn't really need explanation. Distance learning, we've obviously talked a lot about in the last year. So I kind of think this will continue to be a little bit of an issue. Whether it will or won't, we know it's 100% an issue here in 2020, 2021. So we'll kind of point out some of those. And then with COAPs, a couple of you brought up COAPs. There have been some examples we've talked about related to distance learning. Hey, if you're having trouble with pre and post testing, here are some ways where you can record outcomes so you can still show that your students in distance learning are achieving valuable skills and outcomes. One area we've talked about a lot is EL Civics. A lot of you have said doing EL Civics is a lot easier in distance learning than doing pre and post testing. I'll just say we'll look at that, but we'll also look at now this year, as most of you know, there's those I-free outcomes. So COAPS is now its own official outcome. So we'll try to look at that a little bit too, where you may not need to do COAPS as occupational skills gain so much anymore, because now it has a column all by itself. Okay, and then IET, EL co-enrollment, a lot of those I didn't really get, but that EDD, 019 guideline that I brought up from a couple years ago with the do's and don'ts. Those do's and don'ts were in the presentation I've done over the years for IET and IELCE. So a lot of what you're doing on the WIOA 2 side with that, I would say, relates a lot to how you might govern post-secondary versus these literacy gains. So we'll look at those examples. And I really think those examples kind of illustrate overall some kind of rules of thumb you might use for just overall how to govern these outcomes. Okay, so high school credits. Start with an easy one. You're at the district that requires 180 credits. The student has 75 credits at the start of the year. At the end of the year, they didn't graduate, but they'd moved up to where they completed 125 credits. So that's an example where they were in the 9th or 10th grade level at the beginning of the year. They moved on to the 11th or 12th grade level at the end. So here's an example where they earn the high school credits outcome. Student number 2, somebody brought this up, very similar, not the same numbers, but very similar. But here's student number 2, they enrolled. They had 145 credits in that same program upon enrollment. Again, student number 2 does not earn the outcome. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't serve the person. Obviously, you want to just look at getting that person the ability to complete the high school diploma. They're very, very close already. So they really just need to get the job done, get her done, so to speak. The only outcome on the table for this student would be to finish the diploma. Okay, yeah, so yeah, that one, I'll just say the ASC transition that was under the hood. So it's just if they're in ESL or ABE at the beginning and they're in ASC sometime later, then yeah, I'll just say that outcome plus many, many more are not covered one iota here in this training. I'm just picking the ones that generate the questions. I'll just say that one usually doesn't because it's an under the hood outcome. there's nothing you really bubble anywhere in your data for that. It's just something that gets captured, under the hood. And, when we do the report to the legislature, there is another transition number reflected by that. You're right, it's under the hood in TE. There's nothing you bubble or mark. So there's not really anything you can look out for as a data manager. It just kind of happens naturally. You just sort of let it play as it plays. Okay, so moving on to distance learning, we've talked about that passage of exam process. So in 2019-20, we talked a lot about how the feds changed that skills progression. They started calling it passage of exam. I'm sure a lot of you remember that era fondly, but they were talking about how it's really the same outcome, but there needs to be some kind of exam. Maybe it's a written test, maybe it's a skills check. It can be something like CASAS testing, but it doesn't have to be standardized. But any of that counts as some way to show that they did some kind of an exam to move on to the next greatest activity, whatever. So you can use that to mark occupational skills gain. So we were using that same idea as an approach for distance learning. A lot of you in distance learning are using educational software. So that a lot of times that software has programmed quizzes and activities the students need to do to move on. So that would be one good way to record, passage of an exam. Another example in distance learning is a lot of times you'll build in a little quiz that the student needs to pass in order for you to record instructional hours for that student. So that's another easy built-in way to show passage of an exam. So we talked a lot about in the trainings in the summer and fall about how you can leverage some of those activities that you had to set up when everybody was taking that crash course in distance learning a year ago, and use that as a way to record it as passage of exam or occupational skills gain as a way to record in CAPE. So again, we're saying class assessments, written and listening assignments, oral interviews, and so on. Okay, so example 1, learner mastery. So that refers to, that method for recording distance learning instructional hours. So that is, maybe it includes activities on a website, maybe it's educational software, maybe it's just reviewing activities, a recording that you did on Zoom for students that were absent from the Zoom session, whatever, but you basically have the student do activities on his or her own. Once they complete all those activities, they pass an assigned quiz. Once they do that, you now can give them the assigned instructional hours for that distance learning instruction. So you can just leverage that as another way to show that they achieved learner mastery and thereby, are ready to move on to the next scheduled training or next scheduled activity. A more specific example here with educational software. And again, your mileage will vary depending on the specific software you and your students are using, but a lot of the quote unquote higher end programs have all kinds of fancy quizzes and activities that won't allow the student to move forward until they get all the questions right, and have lots of good instructional ways of pointing out exactly what the right answers are and making sure the student thoroughly understands all the answers before moving on. That would be another way that you can leverage a lot of these distance learning activities into tangible outcomes of showing that, yes, they've moved forward to the next activity and still continue to make the same progress as always. Okay, I'm just kind of one broken record here, I guess. Slow me down or cut me off if this is getting a little obnoxious, but I'll just kind of keep moving on. Another example I wanted to address is EL Civics. And so last year, one thing I remember talking a lot about at this time last year, again, kind of when everybody was taking a crash course in distance learning, talk about a time everybody remembers fondly. We talked about completing skills demonstrations and workforce prep activities. I think that was the term you heard Burr that said, gee, that sounds like co-ops. And that's exactly what I meant anyway by that quote, is that a lot of us are doing a lot of skills demonstrations and work prep activities. That's another way to explain not all, but a lot of our EL Civics co-ops. So in doing so, that could be a way to show, a workforce preparation milestone, obviously. So last year we were talking about that being a good way to record outcomes for CAPE reporting, knowing that you may not get pre-post gains for all the obvious reasons. So here's an example. You've got an ESL class that you've designated for ILCE. You've got job search application interview skills. The student passed some of those one or more of those co-ops assessment that relate to those areas you targeted. That would be a workforce prep milestone. What I would say is for 2021, you can continue to, sorry, I guess everybody thought this would be an hour. Sorry, this one's definitely an hour and a half. I'm not sure if that was bad advertising on my part or everybody else, not sure. Anyway, so this year you could continue to do that. There's nothing really quote unquote wrong with doing that, but I'll just say it's not really necessary. It's not really necessary this year. I doubt that's it. I doubt that's it for most of the people saying, but maybe. Anyway, you don't really need to do that this year because, now we've got that I3 outcome whenever they pass a co-op. It's going, it's going basically as an I3 outcome already. Okay, next example relates to IET, so integrated education and training. So that's brought up a lot of new examples in a lot of ways where you can kind of leverage. Again, a lot of you have been working on that IET plan here lately, doing whatever they call it now as part of the SIP. Anyway, some of it relates to that, but most of it is just overall, as a lot of you have been developing these workforce training programs, that's required you to piece a lot of this sort of stuff together more and more, and basically, look at how they all piece together and how those moving parts relate to each other. So as much as possible, you're putting together those short-term courses and short-term services into a cohesive bunch of requirements that enables, students to complete, career pathways and get into higher level workforce training that allows them to get into jobs and so on. So here's a lot of examples. I'm kind of babbling, I guess, but again, it might be a course, it might be, a skills check or a CASAS score you need to get into a particular CDE track. Maybe it's some sort of job interview or orientation session, either at your program or maybe with a Title I provider or a union or something like that. There's lots of those, again, kind of what Title I would call milestones that students might need to achieve in order to get into that certificated program. If you've got students that are doing sort of that stuff that are enrolled in IET or ILCE, or just students that are maybe not doing anything related to that, but are just co-enrolled in both Title I and Title II, that might be an opportunity to record these outcomes in CAPE as well. So here's a few examples. So as a prerequisite to enroll in the CTE component of IET, we'll just say, hey, they're getting into, automotive. So there's some basic skills checks you need to show to get into that automotive class. The student passes them. That might be, one, occupational skills gain or literacy or workforce prep milestone, I should say. They might complete a short-term required class need to transition to that CTE program or some CTE programs have minimum CASAS scores. Usually that's going to be an appraisal where, hey, we've got this automotive program. We don't really do CASAS testing. We're not really worried about literacy training. Once you get in, we're just worried about automotive, but we do require a minimum score of X in reading and Y in math before we'll allow the student in the program. If that's been an issue for the student, that might be another milestone where, again, it wouldn't be a recorded gain because it's on an appraisal, not a pre or post, but you could use that as another example of workforce prep milestone. Right. I mean, that's my term, prerequisite. But
Well,
I'll just, so
to use your example with the automotive. So
like with automotive,
they have to do a basic
you're right.
safety.
If they're officially an IET student, they're doing it concurrently. So at this point, I'm in IELCE, but I'm not yet in IET because I'm doing all these workforce prep activities, but I'm not in the automotive CTE workforce training. So I'm just making up the examples, but I think they're common ones. So maybe one would be for automotive, you need to be able to perform some basic skills checks under the hood. You don't need to be the master at it, but there's some basic skills you need to show just so you can at least keep up with what's going on. Maybe it's basic CASAS scores in reading and math. If you can get a 230 or better reading, 228 or better math, again, if you can just do that, we'll get you in the program. Maybe at the beginning of the year, that was a problem area for the student. Now they're passing it with flying colors. That these are just examples where, hey, it's an identified stumbling block. They're in ILCE, but not IET. Now they progress and get enrolled. They pass the skills check. They pass the CASAS appraisal, whatever. They got through the stumbling blocks, and now they're actually an IET student. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I was thinking of like the safety requirements for like
right. I would just say, yeah, I don't
yeah.
have that listed here, but that's another good example. My examples are skills checks and minimum reading and math scores, but sure, some safety related issues would be another good example where, hey, they've got the skills and they've got the CASAS scores, but there's some basic safety checks that they keep stumbling on. Now they've improved on that. That would be another good example for this, slide.
Thanks.
Okay. It's just not one I thought of at the time I made it. Okay, a related example would be for EL co-enrollment. That is, it's similar to, but not exactly like IET. It's a little less stringent and streamlined. It's just any English language learner who's enrolled in both Title I and Title II. So if you're in one of those, so like Tulare, I know has been doing this. Richmond has been doing this. Glendale has been doing this. So those are three agencies that I know have been figuring prominently in this program, not limited to them, of course. But if your agency has been working with your Title I and you have students that are co-enrolled in Title I, you might record things like workforce prep milestone when students, achieve outcomes in the Title I. Hey, they're trying to get in that Title I workforce training, at the Goodwill Center, whatever. There's a few requirements the student was struggling with, but now they've met them both and they're ready to enroll. If they did that at the Title I, that would be another great opportunity to record these outcomes on the Cape side for these CTE or workforce prep students or EL students. Okay, and here's an example. They're enrolled in ESL at your adult ed program. They're co-enrolled with your local Title I, and she completes 20 hours of job skills training. She got a certificate from Title I saying she did it. In this case, we'll say, hey, it's only 20 hours, so it's not certificated, but it was, some job interview skills or something, and it was the official program at the Title I. That would certainly be an outcome you could record in your data as like a workforce prep milestone. Okay, moving on to workforce prep. So some examples here. Workforce prep classes that are occupation specific, that is otherwise known as short-term CTE, classes and programs that are designed to improve employability but don't really have a formal certificate involved, or classes required for CTE enrollment or for final certification that might be occupation generic. These are just different ways they get phrased. These, I've got to say, are all ones that are directly related to cocktail napkins and matchbooks, things that come up as random questions all over the place. So we'll start with classes that are short-term. In some schools, they would be marked as workforce preparation classes, but focus on a specific occupation. That's what I just said in the first bullet. So there's that forklift operator example again. Phlebotomy is another one. That is, phlebotomy is only like a 5 or 6 hour class, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I'm sure I got the exact number wrong, but I know phlebotomy is a short-term class, but you'd be hard pressed to get anything more occupation specific than phlebotomy. So that's a good short-term example. So again, you're not going to get a full-on license, for completing phlebotomy like you are when you complete automotive or complete CNA. So it doesn't rise to the level where you should be marking occupational licensure certificate for them like you would for those others. But certainly that would be one where you could give them, either a workforce prep milestone or an occupational skills gain. Here with specific examples, I would say, again, this is back to the data police. I can't for the life of me ever seeing anybody get in trouble if they get this mixed up. But I'll just say, if you want to go to the nth degree to get it right, here's my final answer, where if they're doing this in a vacuum, so here's in this example, they completed a 15-hour course on principles of accounting. That's very occupation specific, but there's certainly no occupational credential they're getting for that 15-hour course. So in a vacuum, I would say that's just a good example of workforce prep milestone, nothing more, nothing less. If, on the other hand, it was that same 15-hour course, and that was done after completing 2 related courses earlier in the year, and now by doing all this, that means they're able to enroll in that certificated that certificated program, long-term CTE class, that would be where you might say occupational skills gain. Again, it's using a little bit of judgment, but for my 2 cents, you could probably rise the level of that outcome if there's that extra context there. So I'll just stop and I'll just say, does this make sense at all? Or am I really just kind of talking to a brick wall here? Yes, thank you, Isabel. Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, great. All right, so here's a couple more examples. The same 15-hour course on accounting. In this case, it allowed them to enroll in the advanced CTE program. That's the certificated program for accounting and finance. That's a more overt example where, yeah, I'd say you could give that occupational skills gain rather than just workforce prep milestone. Or, in this case, they complete all 6 accounting and finance courses that, as in a battery, you got recognized by your local workforce board, local ETPO, and so on. That wouldn't be occupational skills gain. In that example, if you get on the ETPO and now they've completed all 6, you could even, probably legitimately mark one of those post-secondary outcomes. Okay, so the third and final one here under workforce prep are workforce prep classes that help the employability but don't earn formal certification. Or actually, this is the second one, excuse me. All right, Rick. So I missed Jane. How did I met? What do you choose? Okay, so again, I'll just say I want to avoid that, refer to that bubble boy slide. That gives you all of that. Sorry, that's 10 or 15 minutes we don't have. You can do that on your own and refer to that bubble boy slide that has all the bubbles color coded. So you, Rit, too, I'll let Janie and Rit do that on their own. Sorry, I don't want to get into that. That's easy information that takes a long time to explain. Anyway, so here's some examples. So OSHA food handling or Microsoft Office courses. Again, in this case, you're looking at either workforce prep milestone or sometimes just a short-term service. Getting into the weeds a little bit here. Thank you. Getting into the weeds a little bit here. You know, you might use 12 hours. I don't think there's any state or federal documentation that really says 12 hours is relevant here, but just because it is relevant for CAPE reporting, it does kind of fit into that whole adult serve concept. So for my 2 cents, sure, if they've done 12 overall hours and they do move toward better employability, then it might be a workforce prep milestone. If it adds up to less than 12 hours, well, then mark workforce prep milestone all you want. It doesn't matter because they don't have 12 hours. So if you need some guidance instead of nothing, 12 hours is probably as good as anything here. Okay, so here's a couple troubleshooting examples here. 15-hour course on Microsoft Office. You know, again, that was enough to where they at least, you know, qualified for CAPE reporting, got in that middle section. So sure, they completed the course, so that can be a workforce prep milestone. If it's just a 2-hour course on Excel basics, that's obviously short. Who are we kidding here? That's not even a workforce prep milestone. For that, just record as one of those training services. You could probably record any of them and not really be wrong. Okay, and then a couple more here. If they complete a 2-hour tour of that office to learn about principles, again, it's something short-term. So you could do a short-term service. A couple examples might be on the job training or work experience, but kind of that same section here, I think, is what we brought up. I'm not quite sure what post-second, I'm sorry, what exactly do you mean by that, Eileen? I'm sorry, I'm not completely sure what you mean by that one.
So you were distinguishing between the literacy gains and the post-secondary transition, correct?
Yes, if you're asking about transition, that's coming up here very soon.
Okay, that's all.
Why don't we just, I'm gonna duck the question, and if it still isn't there after I'm out of my ducking period, then just throw another, you know, balloon at me, okay? All right, so all right, so number 3, we talked about number 4. So in this case, this is where you might make it an outcome where it's the 3rd successive course. This enabled enrollment into the higher program. So again, this wouldn't be just a service. This might be an outcome. Okay, and then ones that are required. This is really the same example as the one I just got through talking about, but I'll just say we in that second example, we kind of talked about, well, hey, if it's more than 12 hours, you could probably make it an outcome. If it's less than 12 hours, it's not an outcome. You should just mark a service for that. In this case, we're just saying, hey, you might record outcomes instead of services, even if the hours total is low. So some examples here where they're in their 3rd straight course. So the second example is probably better clarification, where it's only a 6-hour course on workforce safety, but they've been doing a lot of these little courses now. And that was like the 5th one. They've got way more than 12 hours overall, but now they completed that final one related to workforce safety that finally allows them to enroll into that pre-apprenticeship program. So that would be a more specific occupation generic milestone they reached that might directly, you know, relate to their better enrollment or improved enrollment, or however you want to put it. So in some cases, you might raise the level of the outcome based on the context, just like we brought up in a couple of these other examples. Okay, now getting into transitions. I'll just say time-wise, we're actually okay. The TE stuff we'll probably just need to worry about on May 18th, but we're looking okay with all this. The questions have been good. The pace has been learned. I'll just say I think this is working out anyway. So anyway, transitions, we got some examples for CTE and then some examples for college. So here's some examples of CTE. They enroll in apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship. They move on to Title I. You know, they move on to workforce training that's approved in IET. It's not if they're still on the wait list or if they move to workforce prep courses or if they're in ILCE but not yet an IET, if you're using that as your rule of thumb. On the college side, this is where we get a lot more of the questions. The big one is that top bullet where, I'm sorry, it's these, we'll get there. But if they go from non-credit to for credit, that's obviously a transition. If they're in adult ed and they move into for credit, that's also obviously a transition. Or if they're in an adult school or non-credit and they move to a university, that is a UC or CSU, obviously that's transition to college. These bottom ones are the ones, sorry, it's these bottom two bullets that are always asked. So if they go from either an adult school to a non-credit community college program or anything related to Dev Ed, that top bullet on the lower list is the one that comes up. If they go from adult ed to non-credit, that's not a transition. That's more like a lateral transition, not a promotion, so to speak. It's got to be to for credit college. Bottom line is the activities in non-credit college are considered to basically be the exact same activities as those that would take place in an adult school. So hence the term lateral transition. So if they're moving from adult ed to community college, it would be the transition to for credit college, not non-credit college. And then the other one that I would bring up again is anything related to Dev Ed is basically a non-starter. You know, it's okay to enroll them in Dev Ed, but once Dev Ed hits, that pretty much eliminates them from anything K-8. Okay, and then services. Again, we've got these three types of services. We record in TE, supportive training and transition services. Again, just like the bubble boy stuff, we're not going to get into the detailed definitions. We're plowing straight ahead. Those are the three categories, though. Here's some common supportive services that we've talked a lot about in the last year: healthcare, emergency financial services, financial counseling, housing assistance. These are like so 2020, 2021 for all the COVID related reasons. So not really a lot of clarity needed here, but just to show these are ones that a lot of you are offering. If you're not marking it, probably really, really good idea to do so. We know in COVID, these are ones that a lot of your counselors are offering to students all the time. Training services, a little bit more relevant for some of these clarifications. So we have things like prerequisite training and skill upgrading. I kind of think it could be either one of these, but one of the things a lot of you have been doing, skill upgrades to work remotely. So if you're doing a lot of the digital literacy training, teaching students how to use Microsoft Teams or Zooms or whatever, you know, working with them to get better at using educational software. Maybe there's a new software app, whatever, remote testing, another good example. All of those digital literacy, or what you would refer to as quote unquote, providing your students with tech support. Those a lot of times could be recorded as skill upgrading or prerequisite training. Transition services, assessment and testing. If you've done things like getting students up to speed on remote testing, or sometimes you've been working with students remotely on, you know, job search things, or what color is your parachute sort of stuff, that would be another way to record transition services. Okay, so definitely, okay, is about, So that would probably be one that you could offer as a training service. Probably a lot of those would be, I would say that would be, actually that when you, well, I would say kind of training service. You could make it occupational skills training. I guess you could sort of say that supportive service and make it healthcare services. I don't think there's really one is right and one is wrong, but actually you could kind of go either way. You could make, I would say, if you want me to split the hair to the nth degree, I would say if it's just focused on the student looking out for herself or himself, and it's solely there for the student to take better care of themselves, I would probably say market as a transition service, market as healthcare services. If it's more related to information that allows the student to enroll in other classes at your school or enroll in classes outside of your school or move upward and onward in other activities, then I'd be more likely to market as a training service. That's one that there's no way on earth the Cape Data Police would ever even know, much less ever blow the whistle on. But again, if you want me to be an obnoxious hair splitter, there you go. I don't think I can split it anymore. Any more crazier than that. Okay, so I'm going to buzz through reports. Don't worry about the reports. These are all repeated at the beginning of the training that we're doing on May 18th, but there's the Cape summary. We all know what that is. We've broken it down a little bit. Here's that literacy gains. Here's the Cape outcomes section. I'm pointing to that new column for past I3. We've looked at Cape outcomes a lot over the last few years. What's new this year? That new column F, past I3 outcomes. We'll be talking a lot more about that one on May 18th. Here's a sneak preview. This is a haphazard screenshot, not an official screenshot, but we talked a little bit about that 0 hours versus 1 to 11 hours. This is tentatively what it's going to look like. It's going to be matched up with that services section because that's really where you have that number of enrollees that have 0 hours or have 1 to 11 hours already. You can do what I say. You can do one update or you can do multiple. I'll just say if you do it the preferred way, you'd do it for each class. But if you just do it once, that's a-okay. That's certainly not a data police issue. So this is the way the Cape summary is going to look. Again, I'm not positive it's going to look exactly like this, but this is just a sneak preview. Again, I'll just say some of the details I admit are still murky to me, but there definitely looks like there will be a mandatory goal setting activity that all consortia, all agencies will do that will look at moving more learners out of the 0 hours bucket and out of the 1 to 11 hours bucket and into the 12 plus hours bucket. These new columns will be really convenient ways for you to record progress on that particular goal. Okay, and then here's just an up close and personal view of what I'm talking about. Will it be labeled like this exactly? No. Obviously, you can see lots of sleight of hands. Will it include those red, orange, and green arrows? No, it won't. Okay, there's a supplemental handout on Cape DIR. I'm not going to dig into it, but there's a big, long, detail-oriented handout that I'm sure everybody is going to love a lot. Here's some DIR issues that we've talked about all year long. Things that might, here's some issues that might change related to COVID-19. Here's some issues that, shouldn't really change all that stinking much. Thank you for the well wishes for Oscar. He did send us an update. He's definitely working hard to get better. Thank you for that, Isabel. So here's some things that should not change. We have the consortium reports. The big update I wanted to bring here is, there is now the DIR. So we used to say there were three reports you could get consortium level access to. We now have added the DIR as a fourth area in which you can get that consortium level access. Here's some more stuff on the Cape wide reports. There's a Cape summary for you, and it's 1:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up. Any last minute questions here? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So, hey, I think, Veronica, you're the one I need to pass the baton to, right?
Yes.
You want the
thank you.
baton, Veronica?
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar. As Jay mentioned, he will be back for part 2 of this data dive series in preparation for beginning to work on the 3-year plan. So definitely, if you haven't joined us, excuse me, if you haven't registered, please register. That webinar will take place on May 18th at noon as well. And my colleague Mandalee has posted a link in the chat and where you can register for that webinar, as well as part 3. And then we also have some upcoming webinars with WestEd on different elements of MIS reporting. And just today, we launched our follow-up CAP state priority webinar. So there we will be hearing from local practitioners who are aligning their programs with the CAP state priorities. So come hear about their different practices as it relates to the state priorities. Please complete the evaluation and let Jay know what you thought about today's webinar. And if there are other areas that you think that we should be addressing, especially as we move into the end of year data reporting, as well as the 3-year plan. And this webinar has been recorded and it will be emailed to you all tomorrow, as well as a link to the evaluation, but you can also find it on the CAP website. And Mandalee has posted a link of where you can find the webinar recording, as well as the 4 handouts that were provided today. So if there are any additional questions or anything else that you need, if not, we will get ready to close the webinar. Thank you all very much for your time and your participation. Everyone have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yulene,
Yes,
did your question get answered or not?
what was my question?
Well, you were
Jay?
asking about transitions, but I think you, in my mind, you asked it before we got to those 2 or 3 slides that showed transitions.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think you got, yeah. I was just, I was paying attention to those labels that you put, literacy gains and then post-secondary. So are you saying post-secondary transition or post-secondary what? Outcomes or?
Right, so post-secondary would be both. It's CT, post-secondary. Okay, now I see where so I'll just back up. It's going to be a little bit of a wonky answer, but
Yeah, go ahead.
post-secondary is the term that the feds use to kind of refer to all of those quote unquote higher level outcomes. So like you can get a gain, the next level up, you have what they would call secondary outcomes, which would be like high school equivalency or high school diploma. Once you get past that, you go to post-secondary. So for some students, that might mean college. For other students, that might mean CTE.
Right. So I really like how you did the graph thing where you have the arrows, and that means transition to college. And then this one is transition to CTE. So that to me is clear. So that was good. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate that. And then your example on, I was going to write it in the chat, but I said, you were so quick. And I said, that is a good point. I can't remember what it was. It was something about, man, let me look back in the chat, because you had answered somebody's question and then you differentiate something. And I said, oh, that is clear now. I just can't remember what it was. I'll think of it, Jay, and I'll email you or something. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.